A little bit about me. Basically, see if I can get through this. I wasn't sure if the internet would be good for me, so I'm just using a PDF this time around. But basically, today I'm going to be talking about AI agents. It's mainly like multi-agents versus like AI assistants. And kind of stepping through a couple of the platforms that I've checked out recently. Myself, I'm actually, I have a security background. I have a security company in Japan. I've been here for like the last 19 years. I've been in security for most of them. There's one logo at the top that you won't completely recognize, that I'm not really allowed to have the full logo up there, but I'll have part of it. But basically, it's kind of funny talking to people. They're like, well, if you work in finance, don't use AI, or if you work in medical tech, don't use it. And that's basically where my customers work. It's mainly fintech and medical tech. I need to calibrate a little bit based on people's backgrounds, but I think because I'm going last here, it's pretty easy to calibrate. I think most people here have some familiarity with AI in a commercial sense. This talk is way more about a commercial aspect than a technical aspect, but towards the end, we'll be stepping through and talking way more about some of the security around it. So why did I choose AI agents to talk about? This is the first of a couple of quotes. It's just a really big market, and it's becoming bigger and bigger. So this is still part of the calibration, so I want to talk a little bit about the difference between an agent versus an assistant. Because I'm guessing most of us work with the assistant all the time. Daily, we log into like ChatGPT and we ask it questions. Compared to with an agent, I don't know if anyone here has built agents or worked with agents. And basically the idea is this. It's, if I have a question, I can ask an assistant a question, it'll give me an answer, like ChatGPT, for example. An agent is much more about, I need something done. Here's what I need done. Figure out how to do it, work out what tools you need, work together, come up with an end result. So it very much is like, I have something I'm interested in achieving. Over here, I didn't make these images. Like I pulled them from a website, and there's links at the bottom of all of these. It's like, I have a goal I want to achieve, and I just want the result. So these are what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. But a big focus is going to be over on the agent side, because right now what's happening, especially talking about like Japan, for example, is an aging population. It's like, how do you get more done with less people? And actually, it's everywhere in the world, because less people equal less cost, right? How do you cut your cost and be able to get much more done? So we'll be talking about the usage of agents specifically, and ways to basically automate your company or automate teams. So this is breaking it down. I guess I jumped ahead a little bit more. It is a very specific question where you're like, hey, what's the meaning of life? And for anyone as old as I am in here, the answer is 42. And if you don't get that joke, then you're definitely not as old as I am. But it really is. So some use cases of this is a website. You go to a website, you need support from chat support, customer support, or you have sales questions. This is a perfect use case of this, because you have a bunch of questions where you need help and you get answers. So it's not about either or. It's definitely about each one has their own specific use cases. Compare that with an agent. This might be more like, I have an internal process that I want to automate. It may be, for example, I don't know, does anyone have blogs or post on social at all? Daily or regularly? And that's usually where all the hands go down, because doing it daily is very difficult. However, I'll show you an example where I actually built an agent, and I fine-tuned it with my own sample, and it generates content for me that's really spot on for in my voice, in my format, automatically every day. Now it's the question of, do I really want to use it or not? That's the different question. Or if I have different sales teams, who do I want to be able to score in terms of a lead or a prospect, who do I want to target, which markets I should focus on. Agents are really good at doing this. They can do research, they can give you back results. So we'll be talking about this in a bit more detail as we go. And this is just, so an agent, because there's more involved, and I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There's different parts that make up an agent. At a high level, basically you have a task that you want to get done. So I'm going to use the example of, actually this is an example directly from Crew AI's website. And the example is like this. I don't know anyone here that has a lot of meetings every day. And sometimes you have no idea who you're meeting in that meeting. This is an example of this. So this agent, it's responsible for going out and finding everyone that's in the meeting, doing a check on them, pulling up their information from social, checking their websites, doing a search on their email, finding what you can find, writing up a very clean report so that before you go into a meeting, you know exactly who you're meeting and all their background and talking points based on your agenda for the meeting. So to be able to do this, you have to have tasks. So someone, for example, to be able to research, someone to look at the industry that you're actually going to be, that they're part of, that you're talking with them. What is the strategy for the meeting? Like what is the purpose? So if you include an agenda in the meeting, for example, and then summarize a brief. So you can think about this in terms of like, there is a specialized agent that would handle each one of these tasks. Now, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit here. So we have a researcher, industry analyst, meetings strategist, and then a report writer, right? So it gets kind of interesting here because now, like, I don't have a team of people, but now I effectively have a team of people that can, or a team of very specialized agents that can do what I need to do. And then I can give them access to different types of tools. So I don't know, does anyone use EXA? EXA. It's a search. Basically, it's a website that you can throw in a query, and it'll basically allow you to scrape data off of websites very easily using just natural language. But you can look at the first two, a researcher and an industry analyst, and they have access to a couple of tools over here. They can search, they can find similar, and they can get the contents of a web page. Like they know how to do this. And using EXA, you don't actually have to program any of this. It's all natural language. So, but you can look at, there's a couple of things that are not on here, which are kind of interesting that makes, I think, agents very special. And that is, they have two extra tools that are not listed here, that are automatic. One is they can delegate work to other agents. So for example, if this agent here says, hey, I don't know how to I need to be able to write something. Hey, can you write it for me? Like they have the ability to do that automatically. The other thing that they can do is they can ask questions to other agents. So, you know, this agent here might say, hey, listen, I have a question for you. Can you give me the answer to this? So this is where it gets quite interesting to me. So these are kind of a high level, the work, like the moving parts. I'm trying to set a little bit of a structure here, so when I talk about the security aspects of it, it makes sense. So this is where we come up with like, all right, so it's an agent, how does it think? And basically the LLM that's behind all of this is how it thinks. So, you know, we have to tell it what our intention is. Like, I want to know about the people in this meeting. It can then go use the LLM to think, if you will. But it also looks at it to say, all right, what are the next actions I should take? And what tools should I use? Or is there another agent here that does a better job at this than I am? So this is where it gets quite interesting. And again, there's people here that definitely know way more about AI than I do. So I'm not pretending here to be an AI specialist online. I'm the security guy. It basically uses this. Everything that I've been showing you up until now is built on a framework here, and there's a link for it. It's using a React framework, but not the web framework. It basically goes through some loops of reasoning and actions. And this loop is interesting because it solves a lot of the problems, at least my understanding up until now, that a lot of solutions have had, like hallucinations and stuff like this. This helps to solve those problems. Where it gets interesting is it'll keep asking the question until it thinks it has the answer. So how many people here are programmers or has some software development background or can think of the idea of, I have a LLM over here and I'm going to ask it one question, or I'm going to ask it 1,000 questions because maybe it takes me 1,000 questions to get to an answer. From a cost perspective, that's extremely different. It might take less than a cent for a question, or it might cost like your whole budget, right? So from a security point of view, as we'll kind of talk about later, understanding how this flow is really important. So it really is the quality of what you put in is the quality of what you get out. But I've added a couple of links we can talk about a bit more if you guys want. The next step is, I think you guys are pretty familiar, like what is the purpose of security? And I'm asking this because it's usually a divided group. Anyone have an opinion, like wants to jump in here? Well, what is the purpose of security? Anyone have any opinions on this? To be safe. To be safe. It's pretty close. Any others?
To be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, to be able to sleep at night, for sure. So I'm going to give you the long answer, and then I'm going to give you a much shorter answer in a second. So everyone thinks it's about eliminating risk, and that's not the goal of security. The goal is to manage risk. So being able to sleep at night, or understanding what's to be safe, right? So it's like we all came here, we all had to get in a car or take a bus or take a taxi. All of these are risk management. The problem where a lot of companies go wrong is people think that the purpose of security is to say no. Hey, we want to do this, and the answer is no. So this becomes interesting because anyone here familiar with shadow IT, like the term shadow IT? So shadow IT is basically IT that's handled by everyone except for the IT department, right? And if you look at the cost point for most companies to develop AI agents or AI assistants, they fit on a credit card. So if IT departments say, no, we're not going to build out an AI agent for our website or our service, or if security departments say, sorry, you can't do that, they're going to do it anyhow in most cases. And it will become a shadow IT problem, which means nobody's managing the risk, right? So I've been a CISO of 2 companies, head of security for 2 companies. The answer for me is always, how do we get to a yes? Because it needs to be a yes for the business if they need to do it. It just is a question of what do we have to do to get there. So it's just all about risk management. And the second quote that I really like, it's like, actually a convicted felon of bank robbery was like, why do you keep robbing banks? And it's like, that's where the money is, right? And this goes back to the initial, like, why AI agents? Because this is where the money is, to be honest. And if it's not here, it's going to be in 2030, like, it's, tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars. It's where the money is. So just like I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and it was an interesting conference, especially in Japan, because people in Japan generally think it's an island. And the keynote speaker at the event basically showed a bunch of credit card information of real people in Japan. And basically, it's like Japan's not an island. And it's very, very much true to that. So it's like, this is where the money is. So like, that's why fraud or credit card fraud, all this will never end, is because it's too profitable. So I've been playing around for a while with 2 different platforms. I don't know if you guys have used either one of these, Crew AI or N8N. Anyone? Okay. I like both of them, actually. Both of them are really interesting. I think they both have their place. So to kind of explain what this is a little bit, these are, I would say, fundamentally opposite type approaches. So Crew AI is basically you're still coding. It's very much a code-first approach. You can host it on their cloud. You can host it on your cloud. You can basically set stuff up locally. N8N is actually the opposite. It's very much a GUI first. You can still do some code, but it's definitely not a GUI first approach. And I think depending on where your company is, It depends on which one you kind of fall into. So I work in highly regulated spaces. So QAI is very much the winner, in my opinion, in most cases, because it works into a very auditable workflow. You can do code reviews very easily. You can still do them on the N8N side, but it requires like exporting what you've built and then importing it. So I'm going to show you that in just a second. But what they actually, interesting enough, is they're both very open, meaning they handle it based on licenses. So if you're an enterprise, you have to pay. If you want to run on their platform, you have to pay. But you can actually see you have transparency into what they're doing, which I think is a very positive aspect of it. So I kind of talk about hosting and both for cloud hosting as well as self. But like this is the cloud N8N model. So there's a bunch here in the middle that you don't really know what's going on, and you're hoping they're doing a really good job. Now, this can be a wonderful thing or a really bad thing. So the reason why I'm kind of talking about this here is, so for example, if you go in the UI or you go into your code and you develop a model, or not a model, you develop your set of AI agents, and you're like, I want to be able to, and I'm going to have an example in just a minute. I want to be able to pull some information from here. I want to push the information to here. And if you're using their built-in integrations, it's not perfect, but you can have a pretty high confidence level that, or if it's a good company, they've done an okay job. You can't guarantee it, but if I have a rookie person who have no real-world experience on my team doing the same exact thing, I also have the same problem if I'm not doing code reviews. So, for example, cloud-hosted or self-hosted. I've built my own environment. What's going to look really interesting around this is they all have the same problem. Like the risk is there regardless. So the risk up front is either good or bad actors. If it's with QAI, you have some controls where I made some code editing changes. I have a code review. If I have a good process in place, it's a good fit. If I don't, I still have the problem where someone who has good intention did something horrible unintentionally. The one big problem that I see is actually right down here in the middle next to logs. And from what I'm seeing, this is actually one of the biggest risks for AI agents, and that is information disclosure. So leaking data in logs because of bad practices that were followed. So over the last 18 months, my team and I have been breaking a lot of AI assistants for different companies. Like we've been doing pen tests, or we're doing security analysis and breaking their systems. That's a very common area where things break down. The other one that they break down is when someone adds, for example, another place to send data. So for example, in N8N, I can actually go into a UI, I can add another place I want to send data, and if one doesn't exist, I can make one very easily without making it so other people can see. Like it's very easy to add another place to send data, and if my processes internally aren't in place, then basically it's a huge information disclosure, right? Potentially. So there was a company maybe last year called, not last year, 2 months ago maybe, just before the holidays, called Whatnot. It's an Indian company, but where they are, it doesn't matter. They lost about 65 million records. And what their company does is it allows non-technical people to basically build AI agents, or more technically, it's more AI assistants without, they can do things like they can open up a public S3 bucket. They can open up a public Google Drive, and if you have the URL, you can open it. And that's a very common practice. So the problem there is who owns that responsibility? Well, they're given a feature, and they've used the feature incorrectly. Is the part of the problem. So, kind of talk about how we manage risks with this. So I have a bit of a scenario. So it's funny here because I talk about scenarios, but in reality, it's the same as context, right? I'm giving context for what we're going to talk about next. So in a way, we're kind of AI agents. because that's how they work, is they work based off of context. So I stole the slide from my first talk when I did a few months ago here. So I have a client, and I'm just giving a little bit of context because I want us to think about how AI agents can be used. So here's a high-tech company that's growing very rapidly. They're in a regulated space because that's where I work. It's easiest to talk about. And they're growing very quickly. So the question is, what type of agents might they use? So in terms of agents that they might use it in marketing department, or they might use it in their sales department, accounting, operations. It could be a few different departments. What I want to talk about really here is data classification, because this is actually, I think, the highest risk point and what many people kind of fail on. And that is, I'm kind of curious. So if we look at marketing, we have two different aspects of it. We have content creation. So if I'm creating social posts for the internet, generally it's public data, public information. But what about lead gen? Because if you have a marketing team and they're building an AI assistants or AI agents to work with stuff, they're probably not going to know the difference to these either. Because if you follow GDPR, email address is personal information. In Japan, it's a question mark. It's supporting. By itself, it's not. Actually, it's a difference between GDPR and what we have in Japan. It can be PII. It doesn't automatically become. But if you have lead gen, so you have a marketing team, for example, that's doing public data and private data, and they're using the same system to run them all, we have a problem. Because the reason why we use data classification is to manage risk and actually reduce costs. So I can go to a third party, maybe a cloud-hosted provider easily, and use for public data because there's no risk. Like if it's hacked, I'll have like maybe downtime, but I'm not at loss of like credibility because I've lost my customers' data. Where maybe it would make more sense to actually do it self-hosted, running it myself if I have the capability. The same thing for sales. So it's also like scoring leads or targeting prospects. So some of this might be public data, some of it may be way more private. So if you're trying to score, it's generally based off of information they got online plus any information you have your own. So for example, a company that raised a Series A might become a very good target. And that's public. But if you're also, maybe you're working with another provider that you've got some additional insight on that about fundings for a company that may become a, it's not always that cut and dry. Accounting, I think, is pretty easy. Like it's all company internal. But I've separated PII out here from from confidential data because of compliance and regulatory reasons, you have to treat it differently. And if you don't, you get fined, basically. So, in Japan, we have at least 3 layers of PII. So you have the first layer, which is like address and phone number. The second layer is basically criminal record. Have they been in the hospital? What is their medical records? The third one is actually my number, which actually, if you handle it incorrectly, you can go to jail. So, it gets way more complicated than that. So, but the main thing here is look at all right, here's a fictitious company. Here are different ways that they could use it, but they have very different use cases, even within one team, right? So this is, I used N8 to build this, and this here is actually, I want to kind of bring it out here because I'm going to go into a threat model, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about what the threats are around this. But you can see over here that I have a way to trigger this agent. This is just for demo, so it's like click on a button, it automatically will run through a scenario where it has to generate posts, like LinkedIn or Twitter posts. And one loop is one post. So what it will do in this case is it will say, hey, agent, I want you to go out there and I want you to say, all right, I have a model that I'm working with, which I've fine-tuned off of a base model using work of my own as examples. The buffer is basically just a place for it to work, to actually run through some memory, to be able to manage it. Over here, it's like get my brand brief. But the interesting thing is I wrote a brand brief. It's about, I don't know, 4 pages long. That's all about me. And I host it in Notion. So it's like part of what it does is it says, oh, I'm going to write some posts, and here's the train model, and here's your brand brief. And it gets kind of interesting because there's a step in here that says get feedback. So what happens here in this agent actually is there's one that goes out and gets ideas. There's another one actually that writes the content. There's a third one that then scores the content that was written by this agent based on my brand, like my brand brief or my who I say I am or what I like to talk about and my values. And it makes the determination of, is it at the level needed or not? And if it is, it'll send a request out here, which we're going to talk way more about this in a second. And it will create a draft of this post for me. And if it's not, what it'll do is it'll go back and say, hey, how do we change this post to make it better? And then it'll rescore it again. And it'll keep doing that process until it gets to a certain level and it passes the barrier I've set for a score. And once it's done that, it'll then post this and it'll move on. And this can be triggered based on time. It can be, really any event that I want to use to trigger it. And I will share this. So in the next couple of days, I'll put it up on GitHub. I haven't done that quite yet. But this one here is built with UI. And I'll give you links to the original source where I've copied this from. And I've worked with it and made some changes. And actually, you can use the menu here to actually export and import it to save you some time from having to do the same thing. Are we still okay on time, hopefully? So going back to how we manage risk. So one of the biggest things is to know what risks we need to manage. So if I look over here, I have, and this is what we use on a daily basis. So like when we're doing a threat model, we use it to basically, if we're going to do a test, identify where we should focus our energy and effort to have the biggest return on investment, because there's never enough time to test everything. I wish there was, then we would make way more money. But so the idea here is you take a network architecture, the applications. In this case, I took the previous design that I made, and I came up with something that looks a little bit like garbage over here. But I'm going to go into this a lot more detail so you understand what it actually is. But I'm curious, does anyone here see what the missing resource is? Because actually not all resources are in the threat model. So threat model in the middle, I have compute. I talk about OpenAI, and FeedHive is actually the service I use to publish content. I have like my dependencies, Docker images that I build. So if I was to deploy this out on like Crew AI, I would need those two things. My build pipelines, I have users, which in this case is just me, but I was basically included in there is I'm the one that's clicking the button. But I don't have to be. I've included Notion over here as well. The missing one is actually, anyone have any guess?
Logging?
Huh?
Logging resources or?
Login, yeah, that's possible. I'm actually talking about the database.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Over on the right-hand side, and the reason why is because in my architecture, I show a database because that's what I already have one running in my environment. But actually, for this application, I don't use a database at all. So therefore, it's out of scope. And normally what I would do is I would actually include it on the diagram and mark it out of scope, and then it would actually change it to like a dashed line. So you would know that it's there, but not actually being used. And this was just to make sure. I didn't know how many people would be here to see if people were paying attention or not. But so this is the threat model in a bit bigger detail. So has anyone ever built a threat model before? No? Yes? Yes? Okay. So threat model, you can use a tool. I've been using ThreatDragon, which is an open source OWASP project. My favorite is probably a whiteboard, to be honest. Whiteboards work pretty well. I don't really like pencils and papers, but because if you have a few different people there, it's hard to see. But a whiteboard works pretty well. Also, the tool I'll show you. It's a completely free open source tool. And I'll tell you what my next step is after this, which I think will become really interesting because it's structured data. So threat reckoning gives me the ability to use one of many different threat model frameworks. One of the most common is called Stride. It was made by Microsoft and a few folks a long time ago. It basically stands for like spoofing, tampering, repudiation. I did what I say I did, and this happens with like, if someone shares their password with somebody, it's the easiest one because you're like, well, I didn't make that change, they did because they also have the password, and now I can't control my environment. So I mentioned I use a program called FeedHive, which actually I'm a big fan of, to be honest. I'm going to say that right now because I'm going to talk a little bit bad about them in just a second. They're one of the only social posting apps that has an API. The other ones don't. And they're actually designed to integrate with AI agents, which is even better. But one of the things that they do, for example, is they actually do have I would say a small vulnerability in their system. And that is, but anyhow, I'll go into that in a bit more detail. So you basically work with a team. They say threat modeling is not an individual or a security task, it's a team sport. So a threat model you usually do with the security team, the developers, the infrastructure folks, the project managers, the product owners, really anyone that's involved in the project in any way, you try to have them in that meeting because the goal here is to understand what the full risks are from the business as well as the technical side of it. So I got ahead of myself here a little bit. So I'm going to talk about FeedHive here for just a second. So I'm going through a process, and you can see what the different components are. So like I have the different processes. These are actually trust boundaries. Like I've used some authentication to kind of secure the endpoint and whatnot. If you ever use a tool like this, basically the idea is you want all of these different components to be read by the time you're done. So red means there's at least one risk or one threat that you want to test. And if it's not, it means you haven't done a complete job. So for FeedHive, I've actually pulled up two. So for FeedHive, I went ahead and I found one. So this is going to go back to what the easiest tool to use is, and what the most secure tool to use is not always the same. So if you look at N8N, where you have which I think is a code, like as a UI first, code second type platform, it works really well for non-technical folks, as well as technical. If you have an idea, you want to quickly put it together, it's really quick for that. But it will let you shoot yourself in the foot or let you create big problems if you're not careful. And unfortunately, the people that would generally use it wouldn't know the difference. So FeedHive, the way you integrate with it is they give you a URL with an embedded authorization parameter that's static, that never changes. That's actually set as part of a GET request, not a POST request. So for the technical folks in here, generally when you want to create a resource, you would send a POST request, an authorization via headers, and you would not send it by a GET parameter on a GET request because it'll be logged, right? So you're basically, every time you make a request, you're most likely saving your authorization tokens to your logs, which means now anyone who has access to your logs can see it, as well as Google or whoever else that you're running on their platform. So if you run the self-hosted version, it's the same problem. Unfortunately, there's no way for most people that are not technical or not looking at it from a security point of view to realize that, because to be able to configure this, I literally went into FeedHive's website and I clicked on, it was like URL wonderfully convenient. It was one click, one paste. That was all it took to actually configure it so that it would actually run it, set it here, which gave me an instant vulnerability in the system. But kind of some common attacks before we kind of wrap things up and open up to questions. The types of problems that Well, like AI assistants and agents are similar in many, many ways. They have very different risks. So if you look at it from an AI assistant, we've heard a lot about like prompt injection, or kind of social engineering, which is basically prompt injection of the system. Basically, one of my favorites is if you go up to GitHub, you can find a bunch of pre-baked prompt injections, and one of my favorites is the one where you're telling the AI assistant that you're actually in the movie Star Wars, and that you're practicing against the dark side, and they're the dark side, and you basically tell them how to, do whatever it is that you want to achieve, and through role playing, you have the ability to get what you want. And then data extraction, which actually one of the previous talks talked about this a lot, because I see a lot of front ends that are wrappers around systems, allow you to do, allow the user to type in their input that they want and be able to pull out as much data that's not even theirs on the front end. So like those are the most common three. But it all breaks down to breaking down their guardrails and getting past the injection point, because unfortunately most people or most companies still take what the user gives them and sends it to the model, takes what the model gives them and sends it back to the user. That's still very common. So I can't say exactly how many we've run into in the last 18 months, but a lot. Agents, on the other hand, have very different threats, because the users don't usually interact with the agents directly themselves. They might in terms of like, I'm on a marketing team and I wanted to process some, create some post for me. That's kind of just a made-up example, to be honest. It's more along the lines of, I have an internal process that I want to become more efficient. So the way you would attack this type of system is a lot less about what information you send it directly, because most of it has already been hard-coded, predetermined. You might have some inputs from different areas, but basically what you're doing is you're trying to add in multiple additional agents. So maybe your normal process has 3, and you found a way to add 4. Or you had 3 and you found one way to replace one of them. This, again, goes more on the self-hosted side. And I think a lot of that ends up being around pipelines and managing access, which we'll talk about in just a second. I forgot this in the next slide. So communication, like interpretation, like basically it's just trying to alter the feedback and disrupt the service. It's all about either disruption or change in the biases is the main attacks around agents that I've found. And I'm sure there's other ones out there that I'm missing. I have way more experience on the AI assistant side than I do on the agent side. This is probably over the last 1 to 2 quarters in terms of time. I've added a couple of mitigations. So on the agent side, a lot of it ends up being either just input validation or removing the user's ability to add anything they want, as well as being able to validate what's going back from them, or simply not returning back what's not expected in some way. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm just trying to say that this part is easy to understand what the problems are. The agent side, I think, is a little bit different. So regarding attacks, I think it's access control and monitoring. Because if you have monitoring in place, you can easily see that you have another agent running, if you're doing it right. Or that you have drift. I mean, you check the SHA of the git commit is different now than it was before, then you know there's a difference that wasn't planned, those type of things. Communication, the cool thing around QAI as well as N8N is they actually give you out-of-the-box support basically for Kubernetes and other container-based systems, which means scaling them is really easy, I mean, comparatively speaking. But I think the problem that most companies that I come across is they have encryption, like in transit, like TLS enabled outside of their system until their perimeter, and then it all becomes open traffic. Kubernetes and a lot of other services like service meshes or zero trust, for example. I hate the term, but the technology is pretty solid. It gives us the ability to actually encrypt internally within our environment. And And I've done it end to end. So if anyone's ever has any questions or want to talk about it, like I'm definitely happy to talk about it. But it really comes down to making sure that access control, making sure your pipelines, making sure your dependencies that you're using are clean. And none of those are actually AI or LLM type problems. So it ends up being around proper access control. That kind of wraps that up. I'm open to questions. Again, if anyone wants to know anything, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, yeah, questions?
I think, thank you for the presentation, of course. I think that modern AI agents networks can be really big. For example, I know that some of application development AI agent systems have over 50 different models. And all of them may be used as AI agent in the system for one single request.
Yeah.
So how do you handle security if there are a lot of AI agents and security breach could be in any of them?
No, it's a really good question. And I think one of the very first slides that I was kind of showing kind of it doesn't explain it, but I think it shows it in a very good way. So if you look at this one, for example, I have a set of tools, right? And the set of tools are not all agents have access to all tools. So you have a segmentation. So just like people, in an environment, you don't give everyone admin access to your database, right? I think it's the same way in these systems. So it comes down to access control and segmentation. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this, but so for example, the first way to do it is to make sure everything's not running under single processes, because if they are, they all have the same access anyhow. The second part is not everything actually has to run in the same containers, the same systems, unless you're starting from the point where you're building vertical. Like if you have very fat images where you're running everything in one, you're right, it's not going to work very well. The risk is going to be very high. But it's the same thing as having given everyone in your team access to the database. Like it's the same thing. So I think it's all about breaking it down. Still, the rules of least privilege is going to be one of the key factors. The other part of it, I think, is going to be very company specific. So I've worked on teams. I think the biggest team I worked on was about 40. The best team I worked on was 5. If I have multiple groups of 5, it's way better. So I think if you're able to build that same structure within your agent structure, I think that will work out well. Where maybe it's not granular to the point of every single agent running. Maybe you have a role. But the interesting thing around this is there's, at least in the Crew AI one, and this is built on LangChain and a couple of things around that, is that the two features that the agents I don't have listed here is the ability to ask another coworker and the ability to delegate that work to another coworker. Because that would still, I think, in many ways solve some of those problems. Because if I need to access the database and I don't have access, I can go to one of the other agents that do have access. So I think that's kind of how you achieve some of it.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think when the AI will be smarter, we will treat it as real humans. When will it be?
I don't know. I can tell you that right now I'm having a lot of fun with it. So
Okay.
I'm both the building. I mean, on the security side, we break stuff all the time. But on the building side, that's not an area that I spend as much time on. But I've been really enjoying that over the last couple of months.
Thank you very much.
So, any other questions?
Good presentation, Charles. Actually, since I'm not an IT expert, I want to understand more about the key difference between AI assistant and AI agent.
Okay.
Because as short as I know from your presentation, AI agent must be more advanced compared to the AI assistant. So I mean, like, it's like, is it like ChatGPT, but they can do another specific task, and we just wait for the task to be done, or what? Or, and the second question is, that's the first question, what is the key difference? And the second question, what do you think about the future of healthcare, finance, education, maybe legal industries regarding the use of AI agent, if they can finish the task that we give? And I think it's gonna be amazing. Is it? I think it's more like the advancement version of ChatGPT, but I'm not sure. Maybe you can explain more. Thank you.
So, all right, to answer the first one, it's not really, at least to me, it's not the difference between like a simplified version and an advanced version. Like, that's not the difference. The difference to me is the use case. So the use case for an assistant is just like, I have an amazing assistant. Actually, I couldn't run my business without her. There's way more things that she knows how to do that I don't. So I'm like, hey, how do I get into my bank account? And she could tell me. Like, but it's much more transactional, where like in terms of like one question, one answer, and there's some context. Maybe I'll ask her 5 questions, but and they may or may not be related, right? But if I look at an AI agent, it's more like, I have a presentation that I'm going to do on Thursday. Make it for me. And an AI agent will have should have enough context, and if it doesn't, that's a different problem. But like, it will know, all right, so what is the event? Who's going to be there? What's the topic? What's the presentation? Like, it'll be able to research all of that. And it'll actually be able to iterate over the questions and get new questions until it answers all the questions that it has with answers that are sufficient to answer. So it might be over here that an AI assistant, there's one request, I get one response. Here it might be I have one request, I get back 1,000 responses. Like 1,000 questions have to be answered until I get my answer. But if I ask the same question in a different way, it might take 5. Like, it really is dependent on how well I answer the question, versus an agent will just give me back a bad answer, right? I think that's the difference. It's much more like I'm automating a team or a function, and less about I need an answer to this question. That's both. So if you look at, 1 second. So an agent itself, and this is the how do they think. They're still using the ChatGPT or whatever flavor you want to use to think. But what's happening here is this loop that you go through, like there's a thought, like all of this becomes like extended prompts. Like they all iterate over one another. They keep getting larger and kind of, so it's a process of building. And maybe some of the AI specific folks here can answer more about it than I can. But the main difference to me is, what is the purpose? And the second question yet is, what is the, for like highly regulated spaces like finance or health or whatnot, what that looks like? I think it's very positive. I'm very much an optimistic. I'm very much an optimist around that. But I don't think that they can use it in the same way. So I'll give you an example. Say it doesn't matter if an agent or an assistant. I'll give you a real use case, and that is, so for my work, I was like, all right, here's a temp email. Rewrite it for me, make it better. And if it gets it wrong, I'm okay. I can say, do it again. But if you think about healthcare and you're like, what prescriptions are this patient on? And what are the side effects? Like, the impact of a wrong decision is much higher. So how I see AI agents right now being used in that space is, it's not using them to make the answer. It's using them to fetch the answer. Like it's using them to actually find out the information that's needed and actually pull back real values that are not tampered with, not changed. That's the most common use case I see now, but I think it's a growing area. But I think it's the downsides of those areas, like if something goes wrong, are much more fatal in the real term. But I'm very much an optimist. I would say that that's probably the only field that I feel that more regulation is better. I think all the other ones, not so much so. Any other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. What, when do you think that we need to introduce threat modeling in these cases? Because threat modeling, I have the feeling it's something big, no? It's not something you do the first thing to start securing something. So what is your advice in general, okay? It's not only AI, it's like any size of company, is there any kind of like critical data that we have there? Any advice about when to introduce that?
Yeah, my opinion on security, as a security guy, my opinion on security is actually probably a little different than most other security guys. I very much believe in more of a just-in-time or a lean security model, like approach to security. I don't think, you do the level, so again, it's risk management, like the level of risk management needed for the situation. So if I'm one person and I'm coding stuff, the cost of me making a bad decision, if it's low, it's not needed. However, if it's not done early enough, and you've built things out, doing a threat model at the end could be devastating. Like it could be company or project closing at that phase, because the cost to rebuild or re-engineering could be higher than what the company has to work with. So I'll give you a really good case. There was a couple of years ago, there was a public, this is in the news, a public case with basically a payments provider that in Japan, as well as an online e-commerce platform in Japan, that came up with a business-wise to make it so that they could sell goods overseas. And they built this up and they released it, and the amount of fraud cases went up through the roof, because basically what people would do is they would go online and list something for really expensive, and they'd call it they call it whatever they want, and they put a box of rocks. And over here, so the same person would buy it, and then they would get it shipped to them. And they're like, hey, my thing didn't come here, I got a box of rocks. And then they would file a claim. And all of a sudden, they were basically using this for money laundering. Now, when would have been the best time to be able to threat model that? Way before technology got in play. Like the best time to threat model that is at the business idea. Because you don't need the technology in place. I'm not going to say it's like it would be the last threat model you do, but you should have somebody in there that would understand how an attacker would approach it to be able to save a ton of money, because that project got killed after millions of dollars went into it. So like how early do you do it? As soon as you get to a decision point where making a different decision becomes costly. So, yeah, it's hard to answer.
Yes, no, I understand. I think it's about business, It depends the business and the criticality, Maybe here my idea inside is about we need to teach other stakeholders in the company what is a threat modeling, because they don't know, and sometimes you are just asking for it, or you are like, oh, this should be good to do, but product owners, product managers, people, directors that they are deciding, they're like, go ahead, and it's too late when you are able to introduce security, and then it's what you mentioned at the end, after all, But I understand the
But
answer.
that's where it gets interesting, because I worked with a company for about 4.5 years, and towards the end of that, teams would actually threat model their own things before they even brought them to the security team. And I'm not saying they caught everything, but that's why it's a team sport. So the interesting thing is when you do a threat model the first time or second time with a team, and they're part of the process, they understand what it is and they learn what it is, and now they can actually do it themselves. So I would say that in many cases, it's actually helped teams save a lot of time and effort because they've actually gone through the process, even if it wasn't officially labeled as like a threat model, and maybe they didn't even invite us. It's just like in their team, they went around like, all right, what could break here? What went wrong here? Because it's a different hat, right? The breaker hat is a very different hat than the builder hat. Like, hey, it works. That's awesome. Don't touch anything. Let's keep it working. And when this, the breaker comes up and kicks it, and they're like, it doesn't work now. Like that, you need that time, and they have to have the chance. But I think that it's a very learnable skill. I would say that not even technical. It's not even a technical skill. It's just somebody that can look at, all right, this is what we want to do, and this is what could go wrong. I think that's a threat model.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Any other questions? Yeah, if there is no questions.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the invite. Hopefully you'll have me back again.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Charles.